A novel can be as complex as you like. It can be about as many things as you like. My belief is that we read stories to help make sense of the world. So I like to have a strong underlying structure because I think it helps readers understand what it's really about, and that way they feel engaged with the story. In my last chat, I described I start writing a really loose creative draft without worrying about structure. But I think structure is so important that it's the very next thing I think about. I took a look at that creative brain dump that I call my draft zero, and I try really hard to boil it down to 5 essentials. It sounds like that should be easy, but every time I have to sit down and I have to work out my basic structure. Of course, a novel might run to tens of thousands of words and be about many things, complex, intertwined, multi-layered. Sometimes I don't even want to feel that my story can be distilled down to some very basic steps. But once I've understood and identified my 5 essential elements, I can make them clear. And if the author, have not made them clear, my reader hasn't got much chance of seeing them. So what are the 5 essentials I look for? What has been achieved? What has been understood? What has changed? And how is that change brought about, and at what cost? A story is a chain reaction set in motion by what is known as the inciting incident. This is your first essential, being able to identify your inciting incident. Sometimes this is referred to as the what if question, the thing that brings change, usually unexpected change. So at the opening, the protagonist is in their current world. Everything is in a certain state of stability, and that is going to be disrupted. What they are hoping for is probably not what's going to actually happen. What if they hope they're going to reunite an estranged marriage at a Christmas party? What if they discover terrorists are in the building? What if they think they are very important and should not be having to put up with the worst day of their life? What if they are made to repeat that day until they turn it into the best day of their life? The strongest stories are about the strongest questions. Can you identify the inciting incident in your story? Can you identify what needs to change about your character? The starting point is something happening that sets a chain reaction in progress that will become unstoppable. The current world is shattered. It becomes unstable. A story shows how the situation gets fixed, but the end should track back to the question posed at the beginning. Can you see how the situation will change over the course of your story? How does it get resolved? At each step of your plot, it should be either an obstacle which makes the challenge more difficult, or a helpful step that takes your protagonist through this process of learning nearer to the satisfactory resolution of their goal. Many writers like to storyboard to identify the key steps that are going to lead to the end, particularly if you have a complex and lengthy story you want to write. But before I do this, I think in some detail about the second element I need to understand to make it the best story I can make it. Because very often the stories readers most engage with are the ones where it's not so much the character's situation that changes as the protagonists themselves. If the reader feels compelled to be with the protagonist on this journey, you need to create empathy. This does not mean you have to like them. Anti-heroes are really popular, but readers root for protagonists because they understand why they're behaving a certain way. So it's worth considering your protagonist's internal life as well as the external action of the story. Let's say my story is about an ordinary woman, and what if she's accused of a murder she didn't commit? This could be a very exciting story. The resolution might be that she clears her name. But if a story is about change, then my protagonist is going to change. Maybe she needs this change, even if it's only at a subconscious level, and she doesn't really think she needs to be accused of a murder she didn't commit. It could be that she thinks she's got a great life. It's not her really wishing for change that brings the exciting incident. She really didn't need this inciting incident. But what if that change makes her confront a whole series of character flaws? As well as the external mystery story, maybe over the course of the story, she learns lessons about herself. What is she capable of? What she really wants, or how hard she will fight to achieve it. Maybe if the reader judges how she acted, maybe she's even guilty. It's great if the reader is on her side because they will care what happens and want to read on until the end, maybe not want to put the book down. So always ask yourself, what about your protagonist's world is going to be irreversibly changed by the end of the story, and what about the protagonist herself? What will she really fight for? And that leads on to the third essential element, the one thing so far missing from this great setup that's really going to engage your reader. Who or what is she fighting against? Your antagonist. Stories with successful villains, again, can really engage the reader. So maybe start with your protagonist and think who they would be up against in their worst nightmare. Even better, start with your antagonist and think who they would be up against in their worst nightmare. The fourth essential element is reaching what's often called the midpoint. This is important to structure as it is the point where the chain reaction has become unstoppable. The protagonist understands the situation fully, is faced with fighting a set of obstacles. They now know what they have to learn and to do in order to win. In many psychological thrillers, you will find a midpoint twist where you see everything's gone before differently and the goals of the protagonist can change dramatically. Currently, these are hugely popular stories, and I think part of the reason is the midpoint is where there's no going back. The protagonist can only press forwards using everything they've learned in order to achieve stability back in the world. And what happens in the fifth essential element, the resolution. Where will the protagonists find themselves having beaten the problem and restored order in their world? What's the world going to look like now as a result of everything they have learned? What have they achieved? Often examining the ending can help you to understand what has happened exactly, what transformation has happened in your story to the world and to your characters. And then that's the time to go back and sharpen again all those 5 essential elements in your story. Because if you understand the fundamentals of your story, you are in a strong position to make sure that the underlying structure is going to give your readers a really immersive, compelling experience.